Hello, friends. Welcome. This is Ayasoma speaking, and this is Bhante Sudazo, currently drinking some tea. Welcome to a workshop with Bhante Sudazo on attachment and non-attachment. This is a little collaboration with our friends from Recovery Dharma. And welcome to Ela, Nora, Lilia, Larissa, Robert, Tough Like Rocks, that's a nice nickname, and Sarah and Elaine. Welcome to all of you. So this will be a bit of an unusual thing that we'll be doing today. It's a 3-hour workshop, so we'll play it by ear, or Bhante will guide us into playing it by ear. But what more or less you can expect to do is Bhante will be sharing some words of Dhamma on, once again, the subject being attachment and non-attachment, and then will be guiding us in meditation. And you're welcome. I don't know if he wants to do questions before the meditation or after the meditation. Anyway, he'll tell us, he'll guide us through the way. But at any time, you're welcome to put any questions you have in the live chat or any comments, and we can go from there. And welcome also to Jessica and Gabriella. Gabriella says, unusual how? Sounds fun. Great. Yes, it will be fun. Dharma is always fun. And hello, Elaine. Yes, I'm feeling a little better today. Thank you so much. And hello, Liz. Okay. So I'll pass it on to Bhante Sudazo.
Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. Good afternoon, friends. So I was a bit amused when I saw that the title of the series session this afternoon is Tea with Mara, and the image is an image of me drinking tea. So there's an implication there, which I'm not entirely sure I agree with. Nonetheless, here we are. So as Ayasoma mentioned, I'll be introducing the session, and then she'll be taking over and leading the meditations and giving the Dhamma talks and the Q&A. She is so excited that her head is shaking back and forth vigorously. Anyway, so I'll get the crowd warmed up, as they say, and then I'll turn it over to Ayasoma. Now she's wagging her finger. Yeah, she's clearly very excited about this possibility. So I think, well, we'll have to try to make it happen.
Bhante has a very interesting sense of humor.
So, as mentioned, the topic for the afternoon is attachment and non-attachment, which is great because that basically means I can just talk about anything within the field of Buddhism because it all relates more or less to that subject. A little while back, we had Aya Chanda here. And of course, we had a topic for her to talk about. So right before the talk, she picks up the topic and she reads it and she's like, oh, the topic is da-da-da. And she's like, well, that's fine because I'm just going to talk about what I usually talk about anyway. And she actually said, she's like, it doesn't really matter what the topic is. I'm just going to talk about whatever I want to. But nonetheless, attachment and non-attachment is easy because Buddhism is all about non-attachment. That's its essence. That's its core. That's the heart and soul of what the Buddha taught. The practice that leads to full enlightenment is simply non-attachment. It's the full implications of non-attachment and the process of cultivating non-attachment. That's where things get a little bit difficult. That's where things can be quite challenging, in fact. So Since we're here for quite some time together, I think we can start with doing some meditation practice. And after doing some meditation practice, as I mentioned, I'll turn it over to Ayasoma. Uh, she shakes her head again, and she's so excited about this that she just can't stop shaking her head. And now she's making the throat cutting motion. Clearly very excited about giving the talk. Now she's mouthing Bante, stop. So again, clearly thrilled.
It's like having my mother.
So I think she has a lot of attachment here, attachment to the idea of giving the talk this afternoon, which is great, very excited. Anyway, so please go ahead and get in the full lotus position and we'll do some meditation practice. Now she's rolling her eyes. Now she's smiling, so happy. She's clearly very happy about the instruction to get in the full lotus position, even though she's not sitting in the full lotus position. So taking a minute to check your posture, rock side to side a bit. Pay a special attention to the area of your upper thighs, noticing the sensations in your buttocks, in your hips, in your upper thighs, that area. Because usually if our legs are going to fall asleep, it's because there's something off in that part of our posture. So really closely pay attention to what we're doing with our positioning of the body so that there's no pressure on any nerves or muscles or nothing that's going to cause too much pain or discomfort. That said, pain and discomfort are inevitable, so just resign yourself to that fact that the next 30 minutes or so are going to be sheer, utter, agonizing torture. So just resign yourself to that fact right now. And make the resolution that no matter what happens, no matter how painful or uncomfortable your body feels, no matter how unpleasant the mind gets, whatever happens, we're just going to stay right here with it. We're not going to turn away. We're not going to try to escape. We're just going to stay right here with this experience of body and mind. Take a few long, slow, deep breaths. With each breath, allowing the body to relax. Sweeping out all the noise in the mind and all the tension from the body. And when the body and mind are relaxed, you can allow the breath to return to its natural rhythm. And choose a place within the body to focus your attention. So I usually focus on the feeling of my hands touching in my lap. You might choose to focus somewhere else in the body if you wish. You might focus on your abdomen, or on your torso, on your nose. Anywhere in the body is fine. And once you've determined the location, place the mind there and don't move it from that spot. Keep the mind firmly fixed to the anchor point, firmly fixed to the meditation object. And allow the body to be completely still. And let all the activities of the mind fade into the background. Okay, you can relax your posture. Take a moment just to enjoy the peacefulness of the mind. And do a little stretching if you wish. So, again, the title of this session is Tea with Mara. Um, and I didn't come up with this title, so I'm not exactly sure what it's supposed to mean. Who did come up with this title?
Canute, who is actually like online now. Good to see you, Canute. He says, much metta to all for attending. Thanks for sharing your practice with me. So actually this has been put together by Canute, and I believe that the title, Tea with Mara, is to understand our relationship with attachment in Buddhism, so temptation, with Mara always coming in our day-to-day life, presenting us with a big buffet of delicious food, and us trying to understand of the benefits of non-attachment while being tempted by the attachment to the good tasty buffet.
Great. So once again, Ayasoma will give the Dhamma talk. She clearly knows exactly what she's going to talk about, which is wonderful.
And welcome also to Tran. Good to see you. All right. So.
Okay. Yeah. So first off, just talking a little bit about Mara. So Mara is the tempter figure in Buddhism, the deceiver, the trickster. And there are countless suttas which involve Mara. So Mara was or is, as far as I know, he's still alive. So Mara is a deva who likes to keep people in samsara. He likes to keep people trapped within samsara because as long as people are within samsara, he has control over them. He has influence over them. So Mara is not actually particularly interested in whether or not we're happy. It's kind of beside the point to him. He's interested in us not being enlightened. That's what he's interested in. He's interested in us being attached to samsara or some piece of samsara, because then he has control over us. So Mara then, once again, it's not necessarily about making us unhappy. Mara is actually perfectly fine with us being happy and getting what we like and having things that we enjoy, as long as that keeps us attached, as long as that keeps us caught in obsession with the things of the world. Mara also doesn't particularly care whether we're attached to and obsessed with good things or bad things. He doesn't care whether we're obsessed with wholesome things or unwholesome things. That doesn't matter to him. What matters to him is that we are attached to something. What matters to him is that we are caught in obsession with something about samsara. So Mara then, again, is presented as an actual being. In fact, it's a category of beings. So there are many, many Maras, many, many Devas who we can call Maras. So many celestial beings, which are in the category of beings called Maras. But there's one in particular who there's a lot of interactions with in the suttas. Sometimes he's called Nemochi or Antikara. So he has a couple other names, but mostly we just call him Mara. Mara is also sometimes used as a metaphor for desire itself. So Mara is a metaphor for our own predilection to tempt ourselves, our own tendency to tempt ourselves to get wrapped up in the things of the world, tempting ourselves to get obsessed with the things of the world. And I think both uses of the term Mara are quite helpful. One is recognizing that there are, in fact, other beings who tempt us with pleasant things to spark our desire, tempt us with unpleasant things to spark our aversion, and tempt us to abandon mindfulness and wisdom, and to immerse ourselves in delusion. So there are external beings who tempt us, there's no doubt about that. But there are also our own internal temptations, and those are actually by far the more dangerous, because it's much more difficult to resist our own temptations, our own tendencies of mind to want this and want that, and to need this and need that. And coming then to the subject of attachment and non-attachment. So attachment, there's a few different Pali words which we could translate as attachment. The one that is most familiar to most people is upadana, which literally means bringing close or holding close, often translated as grasping or clinging. Another word is nivesa, or abhinivesa, which means settling on something. So that is like what you don't want to leave behind, that which you're not willing to give up, that which you're not willing to leave behind and move on from. So what you settle down upon. There's a few other Pali terms which are more uncommon, which I won't get into, which have the meaning of stickiness, adherence, again, and this tendency to get caught in sticky things. An example that comes to mind is fly paper. If anyone's familiar with fly paper, it's this very sticky paper that smells like food, and you hang it up in your kitchen. If you're a vicious murdering lunatic anyway, you hang it up in your kitchen, and flies will smell the paper and they think it's food because that's what it smells like, and then they'll go and land on it. And because the paper is sticky, they can't get off again, they can't get free. So they will just stay there stuck to the paper until they starve to death. Which is very sad, very sad. But this is basically what we do. We smell the pleasant things of the world, and we're desirous of them, we want them. So then we go and get stuck to them. And because we're stuck to them, we do not develop the wisdom, we do not develop the self-restraint necessary in order to become free. We just keep continuing to be stuck on whatever it is we think is going to bring us pleasure, whatever we think will bring us satisfaction and contentment. So it's basically what we're like. We're like flies drawn in by the smell of fly paper. The difference here, of course, is that in this simile, flies are actually pretty much doomed. The moment they land on the fly paper, they're stuck. And that's the end of the story, and they're going to die there. But we're never permanently stuck. We always have the ability to extricate ourselves from our attachments. We always have the ability to let go of whatever it is we're clinging to. We always have the ability to move on, to leave behind, to discard our objects of attachment. And as I mentioned before the meditation, this is critical to Buddhist practice. It's central to Buddhist practice. Attachment to anything is dukkha, no matter what it is. So this session was set up by Recovery Dharma. Is that correct? Is that what they're calling themselves these days? So they used to be called Refuge Recovery, but then etc. I won't go into that. So these days they're called Recovery Dharma, which ultimately it's a group which is about recovering from addictions. So particularly addictions to psychoactive substances, alcohol and other drugs for the most part. And that's, of course, an example of attachment. As we try to navigate life, as we try to figure out how to function in this life, how to be happy in this life, how to endure the persistent feces storm of living in samsara, then sometimes we come across ways of coping, ways of dealing with life, ways of trying to be happy, which are not necessarily particularly healthy, not necessarily beneficial to us. And of course, addiction to substances is one example of that. It's one example of coming up with a pursuit of happiness or a coping mechanism which is self-destructive, which is not to our long-lasting benefit. In fact, is usually to our long-lasting harm. And this is a one example of attachment. But we can also see the same thing functioning in a variety of different domains. So some people become deeply addicted to video games, or actually a really popular one in this country is television. Basically, from the moment television became a household object, people were obsessed with it and became deeply attached to it, and developed very strong addictions to television, to constantly watching entertainment, constantly being absorbed into this barrage of entertainment and information, or pseudo information, as the case may be. Of course, food. Often we're quite obsessed with what we eat, thinking that what we eat is going to make us happy or bring us pleasure or alleviate the misery of existence. Sex, relationships, often we try to seek escape or happiness in relationships or in sexual activity. Ideas and concepts. So for some people, this comes the form of obsessively seeking out information about things. I used to be like this as a teenager. I was always trying to learn new things and study new things and find out about new things. And it wasn't necessarily because I wanted to enrich and deepen my understanding of the world, but just because it was a great way to kill time. It was a great way to spend hours without feeling lonely, to spend hours without feeling bored, to spend hours without feeling depressed. I would decide what I wanted to immerse myself in finding out about, and then I would spend hours, days, weeks learning about that thing. And again, it wasn't necessarily anything that was enriching my life. It was just a way of using ideas and concepts and information in order to cope with the dukkha of living a human existence. Or sometimes it's attachment to our own ideas, our own opinions, our own viewpoints. And this is where we start to get into some actually really dangerous territory. So we all have opinions about the way we think reality is, about what we think is true, what we think is important, what we think is valuable. And we're desperately convinced that we are correct, which means that anybody who disagrees with us must by default be wrong. And we tend to hold very tightly to our opinions and our ideas. Even though if we reflect over our lives, we can see that our opinions and ideas have changed over time, which is normal. It's to be accepted. It's to be, mm, mm, in fact, it's to be expected. It's something which is even healthy. The willingness to allow our opinions to change is actually healthy. So seeing that our opinions and ideas have changed over the years is perfectly normal, and in fact, it's good. It's the way that we grow and develop. But nonetheless, we still tend to have a tendency to think that our current viewpoints and opinions are definitely the right ones and the indelible ones, and therefore the ones that we need to desperately cling to. And besides which, we think that our current opinions and ideas are a reflection of ourselves, which then makes us even more unwilling to let go of them, even more obsessed with them. It's like, well, these are my opinions, so I can't possibly relinquish them or change them, because then I'd be letting go of some critical part of me. This is how we tend to relate to our opinions and viewpoints. And of course, at the center of it all, at the root of it all, is attachment to self, attachment to me, attachment to self-existence, attachment to individuality, attachment to the feeling of uniqueness, attachment to the feeling of separateness, attachment to the sense of me as a separate, individual, unique being. And this is the root of all dukkha. Ultimately, every other form of attachment comes from this simple core attachment to self, this obsession with me, this self-centeredness, self-obsession. Everything else, every other form of attachment, adherence, clinging, settling, it all comes from self-attachment, self-obsession, self-centeredness. So then, in Buddhist practice, then we are recognizing the harmful and unpleasant nature of attachment and obsession in all of its forms, every form of it. So, of course, we recognize that some forms of attachment are going to be more harmful than others. So, for example, if you're deeply attached to torturing small children, that's a really big problem, and you need to do something about it right away. And it's very clear that that's an extremely harmful form of attachment and obsession. On the other hand, if you're obsessed with painting miniature figurines, well, that's pretty harmless. It's not such a big deal. It's still going to prevent you from attaining enlightenment, but at least it's relatively harmless for the time being. Something you do eventually need to work on letting go of, because it is an obstacle. Any form of attachment or obsession is an obstacle. But it's not such a big deal. So we can categorize and classify attachments and obsessions from the most harmful to the least harmful. And start with working with the most coarse and harmful attachments. And one of the most important things to do then is to reflect on the drawbacks, the disadvantages, the harm that comes from that attachment, the harm that comes from that obsession. And of course, this is really clear with very harmful obsessions. Again, substance addictions, it's pretty clear the harm that comes about, especially from long-term serious addiction, can cause major havoc for ourselves and others. So reflecting on those drawbacks and disadvantages can help remind us of the importance of not being attached to such experiences. But actually with anything, it's recognizing that whatever it is we're attached to is impermanent. Whatever we're attached to is unreliable. Whatever we're attached to is undependable. We can't always get it. And it's not always going to make us happy. So even if your attachment is painting figurines, well, Those figurines are impermanent. You might spend all day making a really nice paint job, and then your cat comes in and knocks it off the shelf and starts clawing it. It's like, well, so much for that. Or somebody might steal it, or might get broken. Or you might realize one day you're sitting there painting your miniatures, and you're like, actually, this is kind of boring. I'm just not feeling it anymore. It's just not, it's not making me happy the way it used to. And sometimes we reflect and we're like, actually, did this ever really make me happy? Or is it just something I was doing to try to distract myself? Did it ever really make me happy? Or is it just something I did to try to avoid looking at my own mind? And sometimes that's what we realize is we've been doing all along, is we haven't really been pursuing happiness. We've been escaping our own mind, which is futile because you can't escape your own mind. It's always right here. It's the one thing you can never run away from, no matter how much you try. It's your own mind. So we need to make friends with it. We need to get familiar with it. And we need to be willing to face it exactly as it is in each moment. So that's one thing, is working with reflecting on the drawbacks and disadvantages of our attachments and obsessions. Another is reflecting on the impermanence of whatever it is we're attached to, whatever we're obsessed with. Also recognizing the ultimately unsatisfying nature of whatever it is we're attached to. Recognizing that even if we get what we want all the time, which never happens, but even if we get what we want all the time, then we'll still be dissatisfied. Recognizing that dissatisfaction is something much deeper in the mind than just about whether or not we get what we want. It's the inherent dukkha of wanting, which goes much deeper than the objects of wanting. And bringing attention to the joy of the unattached mind, the joy of the equanimous mind, the joy of the peaceful mind, the joy of the contented mind. Noticing how wonderful and pleasant it is to be content with things just as they are. This is one of the things that we tend to start to get in touch with through meditation practice. So spending half an hour just sitting down and focusing on our body. And feeling how pleasant it is to be content just to sit here and feel the body. Oh, not so difficult. Happiness is not so far away. It's not such a challenge. It's a matter of putting down our desire and attachment for a little while. And happiness appears naturally in its place. And continuing with this deeper investigation of attachment, it's like, well, what is it that we're so deeply stuck on? We're stuck on this body. But what is this body? Just a bunch of impermanent, constantly changing sensations. We never have the same body in any 2 consecutive moments. It's always a new set of experiences, a new set of sensations. So if we're dependent upon our body being some particular way, well, we've already lost it. So we need to be willing to let go of whatever our body is like, not demanding our body be a particular way, not obsessing about our body being any particular way, but being willing to accept that the body is subject to change, being willing to accept that the body is always different, and that's okay. And the same with the mind. So what is it that we're caught on? Is it certain emotional states? Is it certain ideas, certain thoughts, certain perspectives, certain states of awareness? What is it? What is it that we think we need to feel in the mind? And recognize that that too is impermanent and unsatisfying. And that if we let go, if we open up into this free flow, this free fall, of not clinging to anything in the world, then we experience a much more peaceful state of mind, much more serene existence, rather than desperately trying to cling and grab at things. So ultimately, what we're trying to develop is non-attachment to any sankhara, non-attachment to any object, to any formation, to anything, whether physical, mental, or emotional. Because whatever we try to hold on to just drags us down and traps us. There's nothing safe to cling to. The only thing that we can really safely hold on to is the Buddha's practices, the Buddha's teachings. Because the Buddha's practices and teachings naturally lead to letting go of all things. So the only thing that's worth holding on to is letting go of all things. The only thing that's worth being attached to is the practice of non-attachment, the development of non-attachment. Because as long as we remain attached to non-attachment, then eventually that will purge everything else from the mind, all the other attachments from the mind, until that's the only thing left. And then that will fall away naturally as well when the time comes. So briefly speaking, this is the path of practice of non-attachment. It's recognizing the tendency that we have to continually try to find happiness or solace or distraction or entertainment or some kind of coping mechanism in depending upon something in the world, depending upon some sankhara. So whether it's an external object or an internal object, we depend upon something in order to get by, or in order to get to feel all right, or in order to match our expectation of the world. But we need to be willing to let go of all of that, because the nature of the world is that everything is constantly changing, everything is impermanent, everything is unreliable. And the only true happiness and peace is in transcending all the impermanent things of the world, and getting in touch with that which is beyond sankharas, that which is not conditioned, that which is not formed, that which is not limited in any way. So getting in touch with the asankata dhatu, the element of the unconditioned, the element of the formless, the element of that which is beyond objects and things. And in order for that to be possible, we have to be willing to let go of all things, to release our attachment to all phenomena, to leave behind body and mind. So Zen Master Dogen once gave a very simple description of Buddhist practice. He simply said, drop off body and mind. That's it. That's Buddhism. Drop off body and mind. That's it. It's the same as when the Buddha said, nothing whatsoever should be clung to. Same thing. The same statement, same meaning, same essence. So drop off body and mind. It means being willing to allow absolutely everything in our experience to change and come to an end without the slightest disappointment. And this is the unshakable happiness, the unshakable serenity of the awakened mind. It's the mind that can see any experience arise and any experience cease and not be the slightest bit disturbed by either one. Not the slightest bit disturbed by any arising or any ceasing. But for that to be possible, we need to find out what it is that we're clinging to. What is it that we're stuck to? What is it that we're not willing to let go of? Or what is it that we're not willing to face? So we need to be willing to face everything that arises, and we need to be willing to let go of everything that ceases. Then we can finally experience true happiness and true peace. So these are some general words on the subject. Also coming back to the title, Tea with Mara. It's also fine to drink tea. Tea is great. But tea with Mara, it's also pointing to this tendency that we have is we think like, well, it's fine to just play around a little bit with the tempting things of the world. It's fine to get wrapped up a little bit with the distractions of the world. No problem. It's just like having tea with someone. There's no big deal. But then you realize that the person you're having tea with is Mara himself. And actually, this is very often the case. Again, this program was arranged by Recovery Dharma, so this group which works with addiction recovery. And a very common pattern with recovering addicts is that they replace one addiction with another. So replacing addiction to alcohol with addiction to something else, something less harmful usually, something more socially acceptable, something possibly even healthy. And this is a way of starting to break one's addiction. So I'm not condemning this method. It's perfectly fine to a point. But it's good to recognize that that's what we're doing. So replacing one addiction with another, replacing one attachment with another. It's not addressing the root problem, which is the problem of attachment, the problem of obsession, the problem of an unwillingness to open up freely to the cessation of all sankharas. So often we see that in our own minds. So an example of this, to pick a more innocuous example, is in the vegan communities. So in vegan communities, people give up all foods that involve animal products. But most of the vegans that I've known have a terrible obsession with junk food, terrible obsession with sugary sweets. And so what's going on there? It's replacing the attachment, the addiction to meat and dairy, replacing it with attachment to sugar, to sweet things. And of course, you can make an argument to say, well, that's maybe more wholesome, and I wouldn't necessarily disagree with that. I'm mostly vegan myself, so I'm pretty much on board with the sentiments of veganism. But it's also recognizing that that's just cultivating another form of attachment, another form of addiction. And we also do this in our daily life. Maybe we get really addicted to watching some particular TV show, and then we just substitute it with a different TV show. It's like, oh, I've given up watching reruns of Friends. Now I'm watching reruns of Sex and the City. It's like, well, good for you, I think, maybe. But maybe it's better just to drop that addiction to watching reruns. Maybe it's better to watch that, to watch that tendency that we have to constantly find something new to be obsessed with, to constantly need something to be attached to. Like, what is this attachment we have to attachment itself? This desperate urge to have something that we're stuck on, something that defines who we are. Why do we think so badly that we need to have something that we're attached to? Why do we think so badly that we need to have something that we're addicted to, something that we're stuck on, something that we're not willing to let go of? So watching that tendency to just swap through different forms of attachment without ever addressing the core issue of attachment itself. The core issue of clinging, of adherence, of sticking to things. So cultivating the mind which is not dependent upon anything, which doesn't rely upon anything. The mind which, one of the similes the Buddha uses, he says it's the mind like a wild deer. The mind which is not stuck on anything, which is not trapped by anything, which is not relying on anything. So I think that's all I have to say for the moment. So if there are any questions at this time, we could take some questions. Otherwise, we could do some walking meditation. Do we have any questions so far?
Thank you, Bhante. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. So for as of now, we only had a question from the beginning, so we can leave a few minutes for people to write any kind of questions and comments. But Sheltering Poet, very cute nickname, uh, actually almost an hour ago asked, "Can monks listen to Tom Petty?"
Who is Tom Petty?
Musician.
So
Bradley, who's a lay person and currently here, is the translator from lay to monk.
Yeah, so monks are not supposed to listen to music of any sort as a general rule. And actually, to be perfectly honest, if you want your Buddhist practice to go well, then even if you're a lay person, I recommend you stop listening to music. Music is very harmful to samadhi, and it is a very strong addiction. When I was a lay person, I was deeply addicted to music. I had to be listening to music basically all the time. Basically, every opportunity I could, I had headphones in my ears. Only when somebody dared to engage me in conversation would I take the headphones out, or only when I desperately needed to do something that required listening. So music, again, it's a very strong addiction because it is, in fact, a powerful form of sensual pleasure, and also it's quite good at stirring up emotions, which is also something that we need to be wary of. Because often if we're listening to music that carries an emotional overtone, then we'll tend to start fueling our own emotional reactivity. So you listen to angry music and you get angry. You listen to sad music and you get sad. This is not necessarily a good idea. But all forms of music tend to have the effect of agitating and stirring the mind, of generating ripples and disturbances on the surface of the mind, which then makes it very difficult to develop stillness and mental unification. So samadhi, it's very hard to develop samadhi if one listens to music regularly. So a simple example of this, people back before the pandemic, when we were having retreats regularly, people would very often come to me and ask, like, how do I get the songs to stop playing in my head? And I was like, well, that's very simple. Stop listening to songs. And eventually those echoes in your head will fade away. And then your mind will stop playing songs when you meditate. I haven't had songs playing in my head for years because I don't listen to music. And on the rare occasions when I do encounter music, like if I'm out in town for some reason and somebody's playing music, I'm completely disinterested. Because I recognize music for what it is, a poisonous distraction which destroys samadhi. So I'm completely uninterested. I don't turn my attention towards the music, which means it doesn't stick in my mind.
Thank you, Bante. And Larissa is asking, can you speak about if one can be attached to the Dhamma in a negative or harmful way?
So it depends on what exactly you mean by attached to the Dhamma. What comes to mind for me is, well, one major example is attachment to particular viewpoints on Dhamma, to the point where one is unwilling to consider the possibility that one may be wrong. So an example of this, for example, is that many people have a very strong resistance to the ideas of rebirth, and also karma to some degree. And therefore they form the opinion that karma and rebirth are just metaphors and they're not real. And I had conversations where people just got incredibly angry that I dared to suggest that karma and rebirth are actually quite literally true, which is what I believe, by the way. Because it's, one, it's what's in the suttas. Two, it makes a whole lot of sense. Three, the alternative makes very little sense. So I'm pretty solidly in the rebirth is literally true camp. But yeah, people who actually got angry that I said rebirth was real. And it's like, well, why is that? It's because they're not willing to consider the possibility that their viewpoint may be wrong, that their opinion may be wrong. So that's actually an example of attachment not to Dhamma, but attachment to non-Dhamma. So in this case, the non-Dhamma, that rebirth is not true. So that would be a attachment to non-Dhamma. In the context of attachment to Dhamma, sometimes it takes the form of cultivating hostility and aversion towards other people. It's like, well, I am Buddhist and I know the truth, not like these hideous peasants. Well, that's just cultivating aversion, which is missing the point of the Dhamma. The Dhamma is not meant to be used as a tool for building up arrogance or conceit. It's not meant to be used as a weapon for attacking other people. It's meant to be used as a set of tools for developing our own mind, for cultivating our heart, for developing compassion and wisdom. It's not meant to be a weapon for putting down others. Also, that identity of I am Buddhist, therefore superior, sometimes leads to really harmful acts. So there have been a few examples in Buddhist history of genocides happening, supposedly in the name of Buddhism, which to me is just mind-blowing. The Buddha is incredibly clear that killing is unwholesome. So one who knows the Dhamma would not even think of killing another living being, let alone actually do it, let alone do it on a large scale. So that's a form of attachment to the idea of Buddhism, but not to the practices themselves. But generally speaking, attachment to Dhamma is a good thing, because attachment to Dhamma is what leads to us letting go of all attachments. As long as we're completely sincere in our wish to fully and clearly understand the Dhamma on its own terms, then we'll be fine. That will eventually obliterate all of our attachments and delusions. But that does mean being willing to accept that whatever we think is true about the Dhamma might be wrong. There might be another way of viewing Buddhism that might be more accurate than our current viewpoints. And so we need to be open to considering that possibility, open to other viewpoints, and to engage in discussions and conversations about our viewpoints, and always being willing to accept that they might not be correct. There might be another way of looking at the Dhamma that's more accurate. Okay.
Thank you. And Sidira Verso, and there are lots of people with really cool nicknames today, says, hi, Bhante, what's the most beneficial aspect of monastic life in your experience?
It's great at cultivating non-attachment. That's actually the main thing. So the essence of Buddhism is renunciation, and the essence of monastic life is renunciation. So this is why monasticism has been a central part of Buddhism from the very beginning, and continues to be of critical importance right to this day and into the foreseeable future. Okay.
Maybe you want to elaborate further on that?
Do what?
Yes.
Brevity is the soul of wit, as they say.
I think it would be helpful to understand for people the renunciation aspect.
Yeah, so renunciation is another word for unconditional happiness. So renunciation is recognizing that we don't need anything outside of ourselves in order to be happy. We don't need relationships. We don't need sexual activity. We don't need music. We don't need snacks. We don't need entertainment. We don't need wealth. We don't need property. We don't need fame. We don't need anything. But rather, contentment is the highest form of happiness. And that's something that we can have at any time, in any place, any circumstance, with practice. So monastic life is about training the mind to not depend upon anything in the outside world. Okay.
All right, and Bernadette is asking, couldn't one be overly attached to religion?
Again, it depends what you mean by religion. You can be overly attached to pretty much anything. Um, in terms of Buddhism, sometimes people get overly attached to certain forms. So among Western convert practitioners, often people get overly attached to meditation retreats, for example, thinking that meditation retreats are the best thing and the most important thing in Buddhist practice. So, mm, and then missing out on the fact that Buddhist practice is something to be done in every single waking moment. And that meditation retreats are just artificial environments that we create from time to time in order to support the development of deep meditation. But that meditation retreats are not the essence of Buddhism. They're not the central aspect of Buddhist practice. They're just one way of focusing on certain aspects of Buddhism for a period of time. So if one gets too obsessed with meditation retreats, then one might miss out on the opportunity we have to develop a Buddhist mind at all times, in every single waking moment. Another example, which is less common among convert Buddhists and more common among born Buddhists, is attachment to ritual forms. So attachment to performing certain rituals or ceremonies, and often attachment to performing them in specific ways. So somebody who comes from Thai Buddhist culture will think that there's the Thai Buddhist way of doing Buddhist ceremonies, and somebody who comes from Chinese Buddhist culture will think there's the Chinese way of doing Buddhist ceremonies, and someone from Nepal will think there's the Nepalese way of doing Buddhist ceremonies. And that's all fine. These are all different ways of doing ceremony and ritual. And ceremony and ritual can be a very effective way of developing wholesome mind states. But if we think only my way is correct, we must do it my way. My way is the right way. We need to do it my way. Well, that's a bit more of a problem, isn't it? So if instead we recognize, well, I was raised to do this ceremony in this particular way, and this is one way of doing it, and that's fine. And that other person was raised to do it in a different way. But that's also a valid way of practicing. That's also a valid way of cultivating wholesome mind states. That's a much healthier attitude. Similarly, it's recognizing also that the gestures and movements and statements of ceremony are meant to be for the cultivation of wholesome mind states. That it's not necessarily the gesture itself that's important, but rather what we're doing with our mind that accompanies the gesture. So, for example, bowing in and of itself may or may not have a whole lot of spiritual benefit. But bowing with a genuine attitude of reverence and respect and appreciation for Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha has a very powerful positive effect on the mind. So then it's important not to get attached to the outward appearance of religiosity, but rather to be clearly aware of the underlying mind states that we're trying to develop through religiosity. Okay?
And Bernadette is also asking, if music is not a positive thing, why do we chant?
So I don't think of chanting as music, though depending on the Buddhist tradition, there are some forms of it that are more musical than others. But briefly speaking, we chant for a number of reasons. First off, chanting is a reminder of the Buddha's teachings. Most Buddhist chanting contains some kind of message which is related to the Dhamma. Chanting is also a way of developing samadhi, actually. It's a way of driving out distracting thoughts and noise from the mind, helping us to focus and sharpen and steady the mind. chanting is also an excellent way of learning how to harmonize with others. So many years ago, there was a monk who was talking about chanting, and he gave a simple instruction. He said, chanting is 90% listening. So chanting is not about what you're doing, but rather it's about paying very close attention to what everybody else is doing and trying to harmonize, to chant the same thing at the same time in the same tone. So it's also then cultivating attentiveness, consideration, and not self, because we have to relinquish my way of chanting, my way of doing things, and rather release into the group chanting experience. So chanting has a lot of benefits. It's not something to be discarded. It's very supportive to one's practice.
And Siddharavarsa asks, would you say that the practice described in the Kaya Gata Sati Sutta, mindfulness immersed in the body, it's a complete meditation practice by itself?
So it's been a while since I've read the Kaya Gata Sati Sutta. So I don't have a clear memory of the instructions given in that sutta. But I guess it also depends what you mean by a complete meditation practice. I don't necessarily believe that there should just be one meditation practice that one does. In fact, I'm usually an advocate for having several different methods that have different effects and that one uses depending upon one's circumstances and conditions. I find that a much more healthy approach to meditation practice. It's kind of like a toolbox. So in your toolbox, you have a hammer and a screwdriver and a saw. So then when you go to do your job, if you need to cut something, you use the saw. If you need to screw something, you use the screwdriver. If you need to pound something, you use the hammer. On the other hand, if you go out to the job site and you only have a hammer, well, that's a bit of a problem. If you need to saw something or screw something, a hammer is not going to do you very much good. So similarly, it's important to have a toolkit with several different meditation techniques so that depending upon what's most helpful at any given time, you can use the proper method. Okay.
Great. And Bernadette says, thank you for your answer. I do think as a musician that what you described about chanting also applies. Listening and attuning to others is essential. And Tran also adds, chanting is also a way to remember the Dhamma and pass down the Dhamma to the next generation.
Yeah.
Right, that was the last comment, but I wanted to ask you, Bhante, coming back to the topic of addiction and attachment and non-attachment. So the Buddha always recommends to contemplate of anything, the gratification, the danger, and the escape. Can you perhaps give practical ways of how to do that, like practical examples?
Yeah, so this is a really useful framework, so I'm glad you brought it up. So with basically anything that we're prone to getting attached to, we recognize the gratification of it. So, for example, drinking. So drinking alcohol. Is there anything pleasant about it? Yeah, of course. Of course there's something pleasant about it. In fact, there's quite a number of pleasant things about it. So we do need to be willing to acknowledge the pleasantness, because acknowledging the pleasantness means that we won't be trapped by it. We won't be caught by it. It's kind of like if you say, oh, it's all terrible, I'm not remotely interested in it because it's all terrible, and then you have a drink and you're like, actually, not so terrible after all. Maybe you'll have another one or another 5 or another 10, or, and then things go rapidly downhill. So recognizing gratification. being honest with ourselves that there are pleasant things in the world. There are enjoyable things in the world. There are enjoyable, pleasant experiences to be had. But we also recognize the drawbacks. So recognizing that the pleasure is temporary, limited, subject to change, unreliable, and recognizing that it brings with it drawbacks. It brings with it disadvantages. So again, in the case of alcohol, well, one thing, it's poisonous. So it's damaging to your body, damaging to multiple organs within the body. It tends to lead to recklessness, damages our mindfulness, weakens our self-restraint, weakens our wisdom, increases the chances of us doing very unwholesome things. And it can lead to serious problems in our life. So recollecting the drawbacks in this way. And then the escape is disenchantment, dispassion. So recognizing, yeah, there is some pleasantness here, but the drawback is not worth it. It's not worth enduring the drawbacks just to get that bit of pleasantness. So then we cultivate disenchantment, which is that mind of, I don't need this. It's not necessary for me. There is a happiness of contentment which I can access. So it's necessary to cultivate that contentment, to cultivate that disenchantment, that serenity. And the main way that we do this is actually through the practices of mindfulness and samadhi. So cultivating this serene, imperturbable mind through mindfulness and samadhi. Okay.
Okay, thank you. And Tough Like Rocks asks, how can a lay practitioner reconcile the fact that we will probably never reach the same level of practice as a monk?
Don't compare yourself to others. It doesn't do any good. Rather, in each moment, just ask yourself, how can I be better now than I was before? How can I continue to progress on the path? Don't compare yourself to others. Just ask yourself, what can I do in this moment to continue developing wholesome mind states? Also, don't write off the possibility that you might wind up a monk someday. You never know. But yeah, it's just look at your life, look at this moment and ask yourself, what can I do that is wholesome? What can I do to weaken my attachments? What can I do to cultivate equanimity? What can I do to practice compassion in this moment? Okay.
And Sarah asks, how can you support a non-Buddhist friend with attachment problems?
That's difficult. So most of the advice I give is running on the assumption that the people I'm talking to are Buddhist, or at least Buddhish, or hopefully at least Boo curious, because otherwise it's quite challenging. I mean, I talk about all this wild stuff like enlightened beings and rebirth and so on. And so someone who's not at least remotely interested in Buddhism, they're just going to be like, whatever, crazy hippie. So it's a bit more challenging, but you can actually still use some of the same teachings that the Buddha gave. So the reflection on gratification, drawback, and escape, actually, as Ayasoma brought up, that's actually a great one because it's very easy for anyone to relate to. It's like, yeah, there are benefits and pleasant things about whatever I'm attached to, but there's also a lot of disadvantages and drawbacks. There's a lot of harm that can come from these attachments, these obsessions, these addictions that I have. So sometimes you can find ways to present Buddhist teachings in terms of the ordinary happiness that they bring, the ordinary happiness of contentment, the ordinary happiness of serenity and equanimity. So even if somebody's not interested in enlightenment, you can still present the possibility that they have to cultivate a more peaceful, stable, satisfied mind here and now.
There's a lot of appreciation for book curious. And Pawan says, great tea session, Bante.
So I'm wondering if I'm the only one who drank tea.
Well, that was the last question for now. So perhaps we can switch to some meditation practice. For the time being.
Yeah, let's do some walking meditation. I think we can set up the camera pointing that way as we've done before. We can do walking meditation over there.
All right.
So I'll give some brief instructions for walking meditation. And depending upon where you live, if you live in one of those dinky New York City apartments, this may be challenging. But generally speaking, you want an area at least 20 paces long. And if you have a small area, that's fine. Just walk very slowly. But optimally, at least 20 paces long. So start by standing at one end. Bring your attention firmly and solidly into your body. So focusing on your body, focusing on your feet, pressing against the ground, focusing on the sensation of your body. And then start slowly walking from one end of the path to the other, trying to be fully, clearly, intensely aware of your body the entire time as you walk. Keep your eyes pointed down at the ground about 2 meters or so in front of you. Then when you get to the end, stop, turn around. Again, pause for a few seconds and focus on feeling your body, making sure your mindfulness is very strong, and then walk back to the other end. And just repeat over and over again. Try not to move your body any more than necessary. So optimally, only your legs move as you walk back and forth, and the rest of your body is completely still. Especially from the waist up, your body should be just as still as if you were doing sitting meditation. So here's a brief overview of walking meditation. Also at this time, if you need to use the restroom, you can quickly go and use the restroom and then come back and do some walking meditation.
Great. Thank you, Bante. And Surveyor Dude, by the way, says green tea here. So you weren't the only one. All right, great.
Okay. So we'll turn the camera around, and I will be taking just a minute to go and take care of my body, and then I'll be back to lead the walking meditation. So in the meantime, get your walking meditation area set up and you can go ahead and start.
Great, thank you. And then we'll ring the bell once it's time to switch.
Yeah, so we'll ring the bell at the end of the walking meditation. So please settle in for another period of sitting meditation. Acceptable sitting postures include the full lotus position and the full lotus position. If you're not feeling up to it, then you can always try sitting in the full lotus position.
Bhante has a lotus sense of humor.
Well, there's a good reason why the full lotus position has been the standard meditation posture for 2,500 years, because it worked. Anyway, please settle into any meditation posture that you find supportive to your practice, which means the full lotus position. And we'll do a few more minutes of meditation practice. Just continue with mindfulness of the body. Choosing a place in the body to focus your mind. Placing the mind there and not moving it anywhere else. Without judging the experience of the body, just being clearly, intensely aware of exactly how the body feels from moment to moment. Without judgment, just knowing, still, unified, silent knowing of the body just as it is. Slowly, gently unfold your legs, adjust your posture, settling into a relaxed position, stretching a little bit. Taking a moment to enjoy the peacefulness of the mind. So in a couple of minutes, I'd like to switch to an open discussion format. But first, just a couple more words on the topic. So again, keeping in mind that non-attachment is something which runs through Buddhist practice from the beginning through the middle to the end. So we begin Buddhist practice with the cultivation of non-attachment. So letting go of unwholesome habits, letting go of unwholesome speech, letting go of unwholesome mind states. And through our practice, as our practice develops, then we work on letting go of attachment to ideas and opinions, attachment to viewpoints, attachment to particular ways of doing things. And at the end of Buddhist practice, we work on letting go of attachment to our sense of self, who we think we are, what we think we are. So non-attachment is a theme which runs through Buddhist practice from the beginning to the end. And the character of non-attachment is joy. It's this free, open, spacious joy. The joy of not needing anything. The joy of knowing that we can't be disturbed by anything. The joy of knowing that no matter what happens, we'll be okay. The joy of knowing that our peace of mind is not dependent upon anything that's outside of our control. So it's good to keep that in mind, because sometimes when we hear words like renunciation or non-attachment or letting go, then we think we're losing something. But all we're losing is our dukkha. All we're losing is our discontent. All we're losing is our agitation. We're not losing anything valuable. It's kind of like somebody with cancer goes to the doctor and the doctor's like, well, I can treat you, but you're going to lose those cancer cells. And we're like, oh no, not my cancer cells. Well, what's the big deal? Why are we so afraid of losing our cancer cells? Well, it's the same. So with renunciation, with non-attachment, we're not losing anything valuable. We're just losing our dukkha. We're losing our cancer, the cancerous mind states that have been making us unhealthy, physically, mentally, emotionally unhealthy for countless lifetimes. I also want to talk a little bit more about some practical applications of non-attachment. So one sutta which I find very powerful, I forget the name of it off the top of my head, but it's a sutta where the Buddha goes to speak with 3 monks who are living together in a forest. And the Buddha asks, how is it that the 3 of you are able to get along so well? And the monks give a few different answers, but one of the answers that they give is the monk says, I think, why don't I set aside what I want to do and do what my companions want to do instead? And each one of the 3 monks makes a similar statement. Why don't I set aside what I want to do and do what my companions want to do instead? So it's that willingness to set aside our own preferences, to set aside our own wishes and desires, and to instead to do what is wished for and pleasing to and supportive for our companions. And in particular, again, the story is about 3 monks who are living together. So it's 3 dedicated spiritual practitioners. So with a deep understanding of what's wholesome and the importance of cultivating what's wholesome. So I'm not saying that if your friends want to go out drinking and you're like, well, why don't I set aside what I want to do and do what my friends want to do? That's not what I'm saying at all. This is going on the assumption that your friends actually have wholesome wishes and wholesome intentions and are really sincerely committed to doing what's good. But the real point I'm trying to bring forward is also noticing how we can get really caught up in my ways of doing things. So, for example, you and your friends are like, well, let's go out to eat. Well, you might not be doing that these days, pandemic and all that. And it's like, well, I want to go to that restaurant. Well, no, I want to go to that restaurant. Well, no, I want to go to that restaurant. It doesn't really matter too much, does it? You go there, you put the food in your body, you talk about silly things, and then you go home. It doesn't really matter too much which restaurant you go to. So then you can be like, well, why don't I let go of what I want to do and do what my friends want to do instead? So my friends want to go to Caravan of Dreams. Well, I guess that's where we're going. Okay, no problem. It's not a big deal. It doesn't really matter so much that you wanted to go somewhere else at the beginning. And then looking in how we relate to our relatives, how we relate to our friends and companions, how we relate to our coworkers. Where do we get caught up in my way of doing things, my approach, when it doesn't really make such a big difference, when it doesn't really matter so much, whether we do it my way or their way or your way or the other way, it doesn't really matter so much. It doesn't make a big difference. So there's no point in making a big deal about minor things, unless it's a moral issue. So if something is a moral issue, then we do need to take a stand for what's wholesome and say, no, I'm not going to condone unwholesome conduct. I'm not going to participate in unwholesome conduct. There we do need to take a stand. So this is not the place to apply non-attachment. So your friends are like, let's go deer hunting. And you're like, well, I'm not attached to the precepts. No, that's not non-attachment, that's foolishness. So non-attachment is saying, well, I'm not so attached to my friendships that I'm going to do unwholesome things to maintain the friendship. That's the proper application of non-attachment here. As I mentioned earlier, the one thing that's worth being attached to is Buddhist practice. The Noble Eightfold Path. This is something that we need to hold to very tightly. Because it's what will carry us over all attachment. It's what will take us beyond all suffering. So we hold tightly to it because it's our only safety in this chaotic and dangerous world. But when we attain full enlightenment, then we'll drop the path as well. But realistically, we're not there yet. So we hold tightly to the path as it's our only safety. It's our only way of getting through all the difficulties and struggles of samsara until we can transcend all of them. So that's all I really have to say for now. We still have a few minutes left. If you have anything you'd like to discuss, please go ahead and type it in and we'll talk about it.
Thank you, Bhante. And welcome to Venerable Sudama, who is online and says, Kuzinga Salsutta.
Yeah.
That you just quoted. All right. And Laura actually had a comment before, like right after the meditation, the walking meditation. So Laura says, that was nice. I have never done something like that before. So I would pick up things from one side of the house to bring with me to return to the other side of the house where it was meant to be.
So that's a different style of meditation called cleaning meditation, which is also a great activity to do. but I'd recommend doing that at a different time. So walking meditation is really wonderful. Uh, Admittedly, your samadhi generally won't be as strong during walking meditation as during sitting meditation. But often what you'll find is that after doing a period of walking meditation, then sitting meditation will be much more powerful. Your samadhi will go deeper, your mindfulness will be stronger, your mind will be quieter and sharper. So the benefits of walking meditation are not to be set aside lightly. Especially if you're meditating multiple times a day, it's good to incorporate periods of walking meditation. Another thing about walking meditation is that it helps us to bridge our meditation practice with the rest of our life. It helps us learn how to bring mindfulness and equanimity and concentration into activity rather than only in stillness. So yeah, when you are cleaning, use it as a period of meditation. When you're cleaning, practice mindfulness and equanimity and keep your mind silent and sharp as you move things around and clean the floors and clean the walls and clean the bathroom and whatever else. Okay.
Great, thank you. And Canute is asking, when one finds himself stuck in a habitual pattern and he has inclination regarding how it will unfold, and he wants to take an alternative path, but he feels powerless, how does he choose something else?
One thing that's often useful is to ask for help, especially from other spiritual practitioners, from your fellow Buddhists. Just reach out for help. Just say, I'm having a hard time with this. Can you give me some advice or some encouraging words, or offer some kind of assistance? So often that's really useful. But yeah, ultimately what we need to do is to recognize first off that we have a choice. We're not stuck in the pattern. So no matter how long you've been walking in the wrong direction, you always have the option to turn around. You're not obligated to keep going in the wrong direction. You can stop and turn around at any time. So always keep in mind you have a choice. And second, keep contemplating the drawbacks, the disadvantages, the harm in continuing that mode of conduct. So remind yourself, I can do things differently. And what I'm currently doing is harmful. So it's time to do something else. And then actively work to cultivate wholesome habits, good habits. So habits of meditation practice, habits of Dhamma study, watching talks on YouTube, discussing the Dhamma with friends. These are all very important, good habits to develop. And actively work to break your existing bad habits. Trying to figure out what triggers you, what spurs you to fall into those old patterns, and watch out for that. Try to break that ahead of time. When you do notice you're falling into the old pattern, break yourself out of it. Do something different. Just do something totally random and different. Doesn't matter what it is. Anything to break the cycle. And ultimately, what we're doing is we are developing a flexibility of mind. So flexible mind, which can do whatever we want to do with it, which is not stuck in particular ways of behaving or acting or reacting. Okay.
Thank you. And Larissa is asking, in walking meditation, do you also focus on your breathing?
It's not usually recommended. In fact, most teachers will say that the breathing is not particularly suitable for walking meditation. But some people find it still effective. But usually the recommendation is to focus on your feet or on your hands or on your torso. That's usually much more effective. But if your breath meditation is really well developed and you find that with walking meditation, it's very easy for you to focus on your breathing, then that can be acceptable as well. It's really about results. Again, most people do not get good results by focusing on their breathing during walking meditation, but some people do. So try out both ways and see what happens. See what works well for you.
And Bobby says, on the topic of Mara, is there cases of Mara or other asuras possessing people like demonic possession in the Christian tradition?
Well, first off, Mara is not an asura. Mara is a deva. Technically, asuras are a category of deva, but they're particularly a group of unruly devas from the Tavatimsa realm that got exiled for being naughty. So Mara is not one of those. Mara is the lord of the... never remember. He's the lord of one of the heaven realms. Nimanarati Deva, maybe? Maybe Ayasudama remembers which realm Mara is the lord of. Anyway, he's not an asura. Are there cases of beings possessing humans? Yeah, it does happen. Yeah, it does happen.
As John says, plenty of cases. Just watch TV.
Yeah, many of them somehow wind up in politics.
Fun fact. And Ayas Nama says, devas that control others' creations?
Paranimnitavasavati Deva. Okay. Yeah, that would make sense given that Mara is all about controlling people. So it would make sense that would be the realm he rules.
And Pawan asks, may I ask, why does the body shake whilst meditating? The mind is pretty clear and just observing, but the body shakes.
Well, what I recommend is first closely watch to see if that's happening automatically or if there's some volitional element to it. If it's just happening by itself, then I wouldn't worry about it. Just make sure that you are not moving the body in any way. Because the body has a certain amount of automatic movement that it does on its own, and that's okay. But as you continue your meditation practice and your samadhi gets stronger and stronger, your mindfulness becomes sharper and sharper, then the body tends to become very still as a statue in time. And that includes those automatic movements and twitching. All of that also tends to settle down and eventually stop. So it does happen sometimes that the body will shake or twitch a bit. Again, just make sure you're not doing it on purpose. Sometimes if it's really distracting, then you need to just focus on soothing and calming the body, relaxing the body. So letting your posture slump a little bit, doing some long, slow breathing, trying to soothe and settle the body. Sometimes that helps. But usually it's just a matter of doing your samadhi practice with a very peaceful, sharp, alert mind, and the body will come to stillness on its own.
Great, and that was the last question, unless something else appears.
Bradley has a question.
Yeah, or something I was thinking of. That when it comes to like non-attachment, like say with relationships, friends, family, like sometimes what comes to mind is like what that could look like would be not necessarily being attached to how like I want that person to be, like the things that I want them to do, or even like how they should treat me, or like how the relationship should be. But I feel like that's very difficult.
Yeah.
Because in some sense, it's like being, like if a friend wanted to move across the country, for example, because it's better for them, then like there's an element, if there's attachment, there's like an element of, well, I want you to stay here, you know, so the friendship can continue. But practicing non-attachment to some extent is like being okay with like letting that person go ultimately.
Yeah.
Which is very difficult.
Yeah, it is. But this is why it's so important to cultivate a mind which is not dependent upon anything. So sometimes we have good friends in our lives, that we like being around and who we find their company supportive and nourishing. But it's not always going to be that way. So if we depend upon it, then we're setting ourselves up for dukkha, for disappointment. So it's fine to appreciate the friends that you have, but you also recognize that, like everything else, those friendships are impermanent. The person might leave, or they might die, or they might change their personality in a way that you dislike, or they might start doing things that you disapprove of. And sometimes in those situations, it's actually good to just recognize this friendship is not healthy for me anymore. It's not good for me to continue with this relationship. So sometimes we actually need to be the ones who distance ourselves from a friendship when we realize it's not nourishing our practice anymore. Yeah, so friends come and go like everything else. Friendships shift and change, arise and cease like everything else. So we can't rely upon them. We can't depend upon them. They're not stable. And we do need to be willing to evaluate every relationship we have in terms of Dhamma. Is this relationship supporting my Dhamma practice, or is it harming it? And we need to be honest with ourselves, because sometimes we really like someone, or maybe we've been friends with them for years and years and years and years. And we also know that the friendship is not very good for us. We know that it encourages our bad habits, discourages our good habits. And that the best thing to do would be to end the friendship, or to have less contact with that person. But we don't want to, because we like them, or because we feel obligated to stay in touch with them because we've known them for 10 years, 20 years, or whatever. So we need to recognize that and remember that Dhamma always comes first. Dhamma has to come first. Otherwise, we just keep spinning in samsara. We just keep cycling through one state of dukkha after another. Yeah. Okay. Anything else?
I think that is all for today. Thank you, Bhante, for your teachings. And we usually meet here online on YouTube live every Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday at 8 a.m. and 7:30 p.m. New York City time. And if you live around the New York City area, New Jersey area, where Empty Cloud Monastery is located, we say right outside New York City, but Bradley told us that it's not exactly right outside New York City. It's close enough though. But it's very close to New York, basically. Very close. Yes, he approved to very close to New York. It's every Saturday, starting July 4th, in the evening at 7:30 p.m. We will
7 p.m.
At 7 p.m. Okay, there we go. It's too confusing. 7 p.m. We will start having meditation here outside, outdoor meditation. And it's BYOC, bring your own cushion, and BYO, how do you call it? Oh, BYOR, a repellent, bring your own repellent. And also BYOT, bring your own towel to sit on the grass.
Supplies will not be provided. That's what she's saying.
I'm getting familiar with acronyms. They're not very popular in Italy. So after 11 years of living in this country, I'm getting familiar with acronyms. So it's a good opportunity to use these acronyms. 11
years ITC. Mm-hmm. ITC in this country.
Oh dear. Clearly you have more to go with the acronyms. All right. So, and Bobby says, yay, finally get to visit again. Yes, indeed. Mm-hmm. And we'll also have a few other events popping up. We're kind of trying to understand what is best to do in this sort of pandemic in the summertime. So we'll keep you all posted. And thank you all for practicing together. And thank you so much, Bhante. So we'll end the session with 3 sadhus. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. And have a great rest of the day. Oh, good to see you, Edward and Sarah. Bye-bye.